Today, Rishi Sunak faces Prime Minister's questions after his promise to stop the boats. Should the NHS use gender-neutral language? And why don't Brits strike like the French? This is Politics Live. Joining me, the Vice-Chairman of the Conservative Party, Saqib Bhatti, Labour MP Lloyd Russell-Moyle, Dalia Gebrial of Novara Media and Reform UK's Alex Phillips. So what's going on today?
We need to take urgent action to stop illegal migration, to stop the boats.
All you've got is gimmicks. All you've got is the government saying things, making grand statements.
What's new in the new law to stop the boats? A pregnant woman or a birthing person? We'll hear from the doctor who wants the NHS to stop using gender-neutral language. Anger on the streets of France over plans to increase the retirement age to 64. Here it's heading for 68. So why are they so angry? And Prime Minister's questions at noon. We'll bring you that live. Let's start with this headline in The Times. It says, boring leadership, best for Britain, says Rachel Reeves. Yes, the Shadow Chancellor, let me try that again, was giving a speech yesterday to manufacturers at the Make UK conference. And she said, you may say it's boring, but I think most businesses would say it's time for a bit of stability. Is that what people want? They're ready for boring.
Well, look, I mean, we have a Prime Minister who is focused on economic growth. He gave out 5 promises at the start of this year. 3 of them were focused on the economy. What businesses want is certainty. And obviously, we are in a global inflationary crisis. So reducing inflation is number one, getting debt down and getting the economy growing.
Yeah, so they do. They want boring.
By the way, I wouldn't use the word boring. I think there's nothing boring about wanting your economy to grow, focusing on the issues that matter to people. And quite frankly, at the moment, we are making sure that we're doing the interventions that are necessary, and also creating the economy that is good for innovation. We're top of the global innovation index. Right. We're the most in the top 3 competitive countries.
Is Rishi Sunak boring then in terms of wanting
to
pursue those things?
He's a very interesting individual, and he's got a very interesting career, which I think is really conducive to growing the economy.
Lloyd, is Rachel Reeves right? People want boring, and Labour will deliver it.
I think they want sensible. I think they want down to earth. I think they want someone who's going to steady the ship.
Well, that was her word, boring.
She said, you can call me boring. So she wasn't quite saying she's boring. But I think there is a point that we've had a jester as a Prime Minister. We've had a person who crashed the economy as Prime Minister. We've had someone who failed first time to become Prime Minister who's now Prime Minister. And we've got scandal after scandal. And the very fact that they are prioritising, and we'll talk about it in a bit, kind of dog whistle bills around immigration, rather than actually stuff that's going to sort out the cost of living crisis, sort out the crisis that businesses have, shows that this government is not one for actually getting the basics right, which Labour will do, the material things that people need in this country. Instead, they are still about culture wars, fighting imaginary fights, and trying to cover up the sleaze and the robbery that we've seen from the Conservatives in the last 3 years. And when I say robbery, I mean, if we look at the COVID scandals, all that money that was fraudulently taken out, and the government has still not bothered to try and recoup.
All right. Let's go back to the question. I can barely remember it. Is it boring to pursue stability and certainty and growth?
Well, I think there's a real sense that we are in multiple crises and that government has failed in providing its kind of basic functions. I think that's a really visceral feeling. I'm not sure if I would use the word boring, because I think boring implies an approach that is sort of business as usual, but with a bit more competence. I think that the crises that we face, many workers, half the country is on strike. We've got climate breakdown. We've got public service sector crises. I think that we need far more systemic change, and we need a government that is really willing to take on quite powerful vested interests.
So you worried that both Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are offering offering something that isn't going to be radical enough in a boring way?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word boring. I would say we need bold and effective leadership to take on the vested interests in this country that are robbing the ordinary working class people. And there are some parts of the Labour programme that do that. You know, the Climate Investment Fund is approaching that kind of way of dealing with things. I would just like to see the rest of the Labour Party offering sort of mirror that sort of approach. Is
boring leadership best for Britain, as Rachel Reeves has said?
Well, do you know, it's thankful respite after that protracted year of Conservative Party parlour games and the psychodrama that was inflicted upon the country, where we essentially had no government for a year. And that contributed to running the economy into the ground. At a time when we needed government most, the Conservatives were more interested in plotting and faction fighting. So in that regard, yes. But what I do worry about, and when you look at what Rachel is saying, I worry that there's this sort of consigning the UK to manage decline and not actually looking at a post-Brexit industrial strategy that's ambitious. Now we have the levers of power in our hand. Now we have sovereignty. Well, we're on the path to full sovereignty. I want to have a government that says, this is what we're now able to do as Britain. This is the strategy we're going to pursue. And this is the way to bring prosperity, proper growthonomics. And if that means actually singing from the same hymn sheet as everyone around the world on corporation tax, VAT, state aid, frankly, we're not going to get anywhere.
All right. Well, let's talk about one of the Prime Minister's stated priorities. This is the plan unveiled yesterday to stop people coming across the English Channel to the UK in small boats. It's called the Illegal Migration Bill. Labour is arguing it's very similar to previous government plans which have failed to deliver so far. Let's listen to the Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper making that point to the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
The Home Secretary has said anyone who arrives illegally will be deemed inadmissible and either returned to the country they arrived from or a safe third country. Only that wasn't this Home Secretary, it was the last one. And that wasn't this bill, it was the last one.
The British people want to stop the boats. The Conservative government has a plan to stop the boats. This Prime Minister will stop the boats. And if the people want closed minds and open borders, then they can rely on Labour.
Peter Barnes is with us from the BBC's Political Research Unit. Are Labour right, Peter, that there's nothing new in the government's plan?
Well, it's certainly true that the aims of the new bill that was released yesterday is basically the same as last year's Act of Parliament, so the law that was passed last year. But there are important differences. So the law last year was called the Nationality and Borders Act. And that did make it illegal to arrive in the UK without authorisation from another safe country, so particularly thinking about the people coming over the channel in small boats. And it did give the government the power to remove people who arrive in that way to a safe third country. So that was the Rwanda scheme that people will have heard about. It effectively set up a two-tier asylum system depending on how people had arrived. So people arriving illegally on small boats, they didn't get the same protections and they could have been deported to Rwanda. But what the new bill does, it will become an act if it's passed by Parliament, the new bill, the Illegal Migration Bill, is it places a duty on the Home Secretary to remove everybody who arrives on a small boat or otherwise illegally into the UK as soon as possible. And it sets out to prevent any of those people from ever making an asylum claim in the UK. So it's really a strengthening and an evolution of the previous law. Now, there are still questions about it. I mean, we don't yet know what will happen. The government hopes that this new bill will deter people from arriving in the first place. But what we don't know is if people still do continue to come, exactly where they will be sent to, because the government has this deal with Rwanda. It's thought that won't be that many people. So there are questions about what other deals the government can do and how many people it can send abroad.
Peter Barnes, thank you very much. Well, let's pick up on that point, Saqib Bhatti, because that's the other part of the plan, is new agreements with other countries when people arrive here, if there's a duty to either send them back to the country from whence they came or to a third country. Now, the Prime Minister is going to France on Friday. What evidence is there that other countries will sign up to this?
Well, look, first of all, it was completely imperative that we brought forward new measures yesterday. Clearly,
because your other measures haven't worked.
Well, no, because it's actually building on what we've already got. The Prime Minister had already set out his extra resources with the Small Boats Operational Command, the extra staff in terms of breaking the illegal migration operations.
Yeah. But let's talk about what's different today, because the stuff hasn't worked in the past. Otherwise, you wouldn't be introducing a new bill.
But this is really important because it's building on exactly what we've already put out in terms of extra resources.
Yeah.
I think,
how many people have gone to Rwanda? We know no one's gone. Even under the returns, there have been 21.
Well, we were told repeatedly by the left that this was a illegal act doing the Rwanda programme, and actually the High Court said actually it wasn't unlawful. The fact of the matter is we've put this new legislation forward, which is going a lot further than our previous legislation has, because clearly we've had an uptick in up to 45,000 people come over in the last year. They're taking advantage of the generosity of
I'm not disputing any of that. It's about the efficacy, because that's Labour's first point. We'll come on to other issues, but on the efficacy, what makes you think it'll work?
Well, first of all, let's not underestimate the deterrent effect of this. I think even when the Rwanda plan came forward,
but you just said yourself it's over 45,000. It's gone up.
When the Rwanda plan came forward, we heard reports. So it was in the media where people smugglers were talking about how they stopped bringing people over. The moment the plane got stopped from taking off, all the operations started again, and that was borne out in the data and the figures. So the deterrent effect is important on this, Joe. But actually, look, we're going further because we are making deals. And by the way, we're in the midst of a global migration crisis here. I think other countries will follow, and I think we're going to lead the way.
Well, we'll see. I mean, Labour, as I say, is questioning whether it'll work, but not saying it's wrong. So is the right thing to do is just that you don't think it will have the desired effect?
No, we think that the boat crossings need to stop because they're a humanitarian disaster, because they're extremely risky.
Exactly.
But let's step back a bit. Over the last 15, 20 years...
Quite a lot, then.
The number of asylum seekers has not increased hugely. The number of boat crossings has, because we've shut off other routes.
That's
true.
That's
people
true.
used to come in other routes, and because we put infrared sensors on trucks, etc.
But you think the bill is wrong?
What we've done is we've pushed people into more risky ways of getting here, and we haven't at the same time opened up legal and safe routes to get here. And even the French say, and the French have proposed that they would be willing to host a legal and safe route in France for people to apply before they get to Britain, because the only way that someone can apply at the moment is when they're in Britain, and the only way to legally get to Britain is if you're Ukrainian. Everyone else has to illegally get to Britain one way.
And from Hong Kong.
And they're not refugees.
I'm going to
Afghanistan and Syria programmes are shut.
I'm going to come on to the safe legal routes,
but they're shut now.
Lloyd,
so let's be realistic.
Lloyd, the question I still haven't heard is this bill wrong? Is it wrong morally? Should it not be supported by Labour in any way on moral grounds?
Well, this bill won't work, and so it must not be supported.
No, that's not the answer to my question. I'm asking, is it immoral? You don't think it is because you want to stop the boats?
No. I want to stop the boats, but I don't want to stop them in the way that this bill is doing it. This bill is doing it in an immoral way.
How would you stop them then?
We would stop them by creating safe and legal routes for people to be able to get here. We would do it by making sure that there is proper systems that process people quickly.
Just very finally.
From the Labour Party, their plan is an advert for illegal people smugglers to be able to bring people over. Because if you had unlimited safe routes, France is a safe country. Right, the biggest amount of migration we had last year was from Albania. You get 5 million tourists going to Albania. If
you are a refugee and you've got family links here and you speak English and not French, why should you languish in France when you know that you've got the support networks here? Last week I was at the Kebab Awards. Fantastic. I managed. Two of the awardee winners there were people who were refugees recently that my office had helped secure their refugee status, and they had set up kebab shops and they were doing positive things for the British economy. We need a fair and legal way for people to be able to come here.
All right, well, let's talk about... You brought up the safe and legal routes. Now, the government said it wants to bring in safe and legal routes.
But only after.
Well,
that's the problem.
Thank you. You're filling in my question here. But it's true. It's coming after the legislation the government hopes actually goes through Parliament. But let's have a look at some of the places that a lot of people are coming from. So Afghanistan is one, Iran is another, Eritrea is another. Are you envisaging safe and legal routes being set up from those countries?
Well, Jo, look, first of all, what I'm going to say is I'm glad Lloyd enjoyed his kebabs last week, and I enjoyed the lecture on legal migration, especially from someone whose parents came from Pakistan in the late 60s. The fact of the matter is you should have have legal and safe routes. But the only way you can do that is by controlling the illegal migration, because actually the generosity of the British public is being taken advantage of. And when you're on the doorstep, people are very clear they want action taken on this.
Right. I mean, is it immoral? Is it immoral to stop people coming over in boats to the UK?
Look, when you set up safe routes to migration, people will not choose to take risky journeys. Britain likes to think of itself as a country that's all about rule of law and everyone getting a fair hearing. I think today we can say that that is clearly not the case. This bill is about en masse denying people's asylum claims without them even getting a fair hearing. And I'm particularly concerned that potential victims of modern slavery, of human trafficking, which the government says it's so concerned about, will, because of this bill, not be able to seek the meagre support that victims of modern slavery have because they may have arrived on boat. And I just want to finish with this. The 1951 Refugee Convention, which Britain has now abandoned, was established in the wake of the Second World War, when the world looked with shame at how many people who were fleeing Nazi Germany had doors shut in their face, how many lives could have been saved if we had a welcoming attitude towards refugees. History does not look kindly on countries that treat refugees in this way. I am deeply ashamed, and I have no problem saying that this is an incredibly immoral and duplicitous bill.
Alex?
I'm so fed up of hearing the term safe and legal routes bandied about by anybody who wants to make themselves feel better, because actually when you look at this, on the surface of it, about 2/3 of countries around the world outlaw homosexuality in some way. 7.8 billion people live in extreme poverty. 14 countries right now are embroiled in some sort of civil conflict, war, terrorist insurgency and instability. So if you say we need safe and legal routes for anybody who's fleeing something, you're talking about overwhelming high commissions and embassies with the majority of the global population. So it's all very well saying this, but no one actually seems to have a discerning plan of how this is going to be a discriminatory system where you decide who can come and who can't. And frankly, what the government are doing now is vital, because listen, I do think that we do need international conventions on things such as the treatment of refugees. That convention, as you were saying, is about 70 years old. It is no longer fit for purpose, because what we didn't have back then was this unprecedented mass exodus of people from all corners of the world being exploited by ruthless criminal gangs whose trafficking of human cargo goes on to fund terrorism, drugs cartels. This does need to be broken. This does need to... it requires dramatic and assertive action, and Rishi Sunak is going some way into doing that, which is needed.
So you think it'll work? You think it'll work, do you?
Well, no, actually, you know what is so sad about this, frankly, is, you know, this act is not going to see the light of day until at least summertime, by which point it will be mauled by the House of Lords, amendments added, taken out, and it's not going to look anything like it does right now.
All right, can I just come back? I just want to come back to just on Albania, for example, because there have been many cases of people coming over from Albania. Many have been returned, but they are claiming asylum here under modern slavery laws. Should that be allowed, or should people go back to Albania, to a European country?
They should have a fair process hearing, which this bill wants to deny them. 86% of people who are displaced seek refuge in either a neighbouring or a nearby country. This idea that there are only 50,000 people applied for asylum last year. That is a fraction compared to in Germany.
50,000 people applied for asylum came over on the boats. Yeah. There are more people claiming for asylum on top of that.
There isn't this. There's a lot of scaremongering about how, you know, there's this kind of overwhelming... The reality is that the vast majority of people who are displaced go to neighbouring or nearby countries.
Where would your safe routes be? I mean, let's take Alex's point. Where would you give safe routes, set them up, if you could, everywhere?
Personally, I would have them in key places around the world.
Where would they be?
I would have them... France would clearly be one, because there are people who have managed to get to France. You would have them close to places, say, Turkey, where we know that there's a large refugee population still. And actually, this is...
So the numbers would be...
No. This is not a policy that is so far off, actually, what sometimes the Conservatives talk about.
Enabling the traffickers running the boats to places like Turkey by putting something like that.
You are enabling the traffickers when you close down alternative routes for people who are going to move, regardless.
I don't know about your geography, but I don't think there is a water base between Syria and Turkey, but where the vast majority of the refugees in Turkey are. And there, people should be able able to apply, and there should be an application system that is fair. Their fingerprints and data should be taken. Then if people who have been rejected come across, their fingerprint can be taken, they can say you've had a fair hearing, and there is an immediate, on the day, removal back to your
You're
country.
shaking your head.
But
Well, let me
those
bring in
people who haven't had a fair hearing then go to a safe place for a fair hearing.
Except we don't know where those safe places are just as yet.
Around the world.
Right, but have we... All right, Sakib, you answer, and I want to ask about France.
The reason I'm shaking my head is that it's just not based in reality. The truth is,
it's what other countries
you know, and this is why, Jo, you have to be you have to be adaptable.
Well, let him answer.
I heard your policy. I thought it was ridiculous. So I'm going to talk about it.
Tell me why.
Because if you set up safe routes in those countries, you will get a massive influx of people. You know, you're talking about 100 million people moving around the world currently. Of course, we are a compassionate society. Of course, we want to play our fair role. I completely reject the idea that we're abandoning the Refugee Convention. We're not doing that, but we are getting.
I think the words are pushing the boundaries, testing the limits are the words that they have said.
And that is correct. And let's not scaremonger.
You are blanket denying people asylum without process.
People will be allowed to...
Let Sakib finish his sentence, and then I'll let you a final word.
Thank you, Jo. People will be allowed to go through the process once they are in those safe countries. But what is clear, Jo, what is clear, when we're on the doorstep, people are very, very clear that our generosity is being abused, and we need to do it in a way that is manageable. If you do Lloyd's policy, you'll have a free-for-all. And by the way, Labour's policy is it won't stop the boats. It's an advert for illegal immigration. You might as well...
All right, well, I must let Lloyd respond, and then we'll move on.
It's completely ridiculous to say having safe and legal routes is an advert for illegal migration. The only way you promote illegal migration is if you don't have legal routes. Of course, at the moment, you have no legal routes. If you are a Syrian Kurd stuck in Turkey, persecuted by Turkey, because we know Turkey persecutes Kurds, there is no legal route for you to get to Britain, even if all your family live in Britain. That means you are encouraged to be pushed into the hands of traffickers. The Conservative Party have encouraged traffickers, and you know, 2/3 of those traffickers, they live in Britain. And Yvette Cooper raised this in the House, and hardly any of them are prosecuted by this weak and pathetic government.
Well, we've discussed this every day this week so far, and will no doubt continue to do so. Let's just go into the Commons, show you the picture there of MPs beginning to fill up the chamber ahead of Prime Minister's questions in just over 20 minutes' time, when I am sure Keir Starmer may refer to the issue of small boat crossings and the illegal immigration bill being introduced by the government. We're going to talk about something else. Let's have a look at this headline in the Daily Telegraph. NHS must reinstate woman in cancer and pregnancy web pages, staff demand. Now, more than 1,000 NHS staff have written to their bosses demanding that they must do exactly as the headline has said. The Clinical Advisory Network on Sex and Gender, a group of NHS staff, have organised the letter protesting that many NHS web pages have begun shifting to gender-neutral language. Let's talk to Dr. Louise Irvine. She is a GP and also a spokesperson for that group. She stood for election for the National Health Action Party back in 2017. Louise, why does this worry you?
It worries me because I think there is potential harm to women, and women are 50% of the population, harm to women if we don't have clear, unambiguous health information to help women understand their healthcare needs, the importance of screening, etc. And the harm can come not just because of lack of information, but also by eliminating the word women, you are in some way conveying the idea that there's something shameful or wrong about talking about women and our bodies. And a lot of women get very, very upset about that. They feel it's disrespectful. And they lose trust in NHS communication.
Louise, I'm just going to give some examples, or show some examples to our guests and our viewers. You can see here, this is an NHS mental health trust. Our team are developing a perinatal voices partnership networking group for birthing people who have had experience of using perinatal mental health services within Norfolk and Waveney. We can show you another one here, NHS advice. In most cases, a miscarriage is a one-off event, and most people go on to have a successful pregnancy in the future. Louise, what is the impact of those sorts of pieces of advice to women? What have patients said to you?
Well, when we did our letter, over 5,000 of the signatories were non-clinicians, were ordinary people. The vast majority were women, and many of them made comments. And there was one particularly poignant one, which was a woman saying, "I was recently pregnant and never once did I hear the word mother." Other women who have been, for example, who have had ovarian cancer and have had their ovaries removed have said, it's wrong to say that ovarian cancer affects those with ovaries. It still affects those without ovaries because they still have to be followed up for consequences of cancer. So it's misleading. It's also for women who have suffered pregnancy loss. For some women, especially if they've had a stillbirth, the word mother, the idea that they were a mother briefly to that child they lost is really important to them, something for them to hold on to. And if that word is eliminated, they find it really insulting and hurtful and compounds what happened to them, the trauma.
I'm going to go to the other guests. Louise, please stay with us. Dalia, I'll come to you first of all. I just want to show this piece of advice since we're talking about ovaries and ovarian cancer. It says here, ovarian cancer affects the two small organs, ovaries, that store the eggs needed to make babies. Anyone with ovaries can get ovarian cancer, but it mostly affects those over 50. Are you sympathetic to what you've just heard?
No, this is about public health messaging. And the most important thing about public health messaging is that anyone who needs to access a certain kind of care feels able to access it. And regardless of your personal views on gender, politics, it is a fact that there are people who live and identify as men who are born with the capability to carry a child. And it is important for both the health of the baby and the health of the parent that they are able to feel included and can access the healthcare they need. I think we can all agree, and there is evidence in the clinical literature, that a lack of awareness about this particular group of people, trans men, intersex people, can put the baby and the parent at risk. And I'm sure we can all agree that we don't want that to happen. And it's very normal to update language to reflect different realities. For example, in education and healthcare institutions, we have adapted our language around parenthood to reflect the fact that it's not always mummy and daddy, that there are families with gay parents, there are single parent families, there are families where children aren't raised by their biological parents. Right. So it's really common sense as far as I'm concerned.
Louise, what do you say to Dalia?
I think there should be very good targeted information to help all trans people with about their health. It's a basic principle that if you're communicating with people, you have to be clear who your target audience is. Make sure you provide the right information. Actually check with them afterwards, is this the information that you want? And I would never deny that. But on the other hand, women, the vast majority of women are not trans people. They also deserve information that they can understand and that makes sense to them. There has been, with these changes, there was no research at all, and we found that out from our Freedom of Information Act, on the actual impact on women, on obscuring language, replacing using phrases like anyone with a cervix. We know that something like 40% of women don't know what a cervix is, don't know they've got a cervix. My own mother said to me the other day, "Louise, what's a cervix?" And she's an educated woman. And over 20% of women over the age of 50 don't know that cervical screening can detect, prevent cancer. And we are seeing that the level of take-up of cervical screening is going down amongst women. One of the main reasons amongst young women not going for cervical screening is shame and embarrassment. Now, if we've got a word that is taboo, the word woman is taboo, doesn't that just reinforce age-old shame around our bodies as women?
Well, Dana, I'll get Dalia to respond on that issue. That it does feel like you're shaming, not you, but it is shaming women, and it's become a taboo word to say woman, mother.
Absolutely not. I think that the issues that are raised here are much deeper issues of education around our bodies that is not going to be, that is not really addressed by this particular issue. We're talking about referring to people as people. So unless you don't identify as a person, I don't see how this is exclusionary or erasing you.
But what about people who refer to themselves as women?
Absolutely. I refer to myself as a woman. I think it's incredibly odd to say that by using a word like person that you're ashamed to use the word woman. We're just trying to use accurate language. And the accurate language is that there are people who can become pregnant or who can have cervical cancer who don't identify as women. We're just trying to be accurate here.
Oh,
They're
Louise
not
wants to
doing-
come out and I'll come to you.
Yes,
Sorry, Louise,
please.
go on.
They're not doing the same for words about men, and this is really crucial.
Well, they should.
The words. No, they shouldn't. I don't
They should.
agree. I think
Trans
we need
women-
clear information. For example, if you have an explanation of what is cancer, of what is cervical cancer, and the answer is cervical cancer is cancer anywhere on the cervix, which is part of the reproductive system. It doesn't actually say it's a part of the male or female reproductive system. That is very different from the previous formulation, which is cervical cancer is cancer that women have on their cervix. The cervix is the entrance to the womb at the top of the vagina. It explains really clearly what the cervix is, where it is, and that it is part of a woman's body. Now, this obscure language is actually not helping to educate women or men or people about their bodies, their sexed bodies. And even the NHS's guide to inclusive language says that where sex is relevant, the word sex-related should be used. And also the Women's Health Strategy for England is very clear that we should be using women's words.
How do you address the fact that there are people who do not identify as women for whom these issues can impact, and they are typically erased or not included in these kind of care services? How do you propose that we engage those people then?
Well, I think their needs are very important, and health services should engage them and should be available for them. And we should be actually targeting information specifically for their needs. For example, a trans woman may well have a need to both have screening for prostate disorders, or may well have testicular problems, but may well also, because she's taking hormones, estrogen, may well also need breast screening. So may well actually need elements of screening that apply typically to men and women.
All right.
So that's the tailored approach to individual variation, which
this is a
is
ghettoisation
very
of
important.
healthcare. I think we need
it's
universal,
targeting.
powerful
I think targeting.
messaging. But when we're talking
universal
about,
messages have to reach the 51% of the population who are women and who currently are not relating to this literature. That's why so many
do women
signed
not
this letter.
feel included in the word people or person?
No,
I don't understand. And how come when you look at all other forms of medical literature or medical public health guidance, where the word people is used, when actually I want to raise a really important question here, because when we're talking about gender-specific healthcare, actually I think this is much less of an issue. What's more of an issue is the fact that the way that certain symptoms of what are considered to be generalised conditions appear in women, for example, heart failure or heart conditions, are not legible as that.
All right.
That's actually the real issue.
All right. Well, let me hang on, Louise.
over
Let me bring in
language.
the others. Alex, first of all.
Well, it sickens me that on International Women's Day, instead of focusing on areas of women's healthcare that really need boosting, whether it's menopause medication, whether it's menstrual support, whether it's fertility treatment, we're actually talking about whether the word woman can appear on the publicly funded NHS website of medical guidelines. I mean, this is utterly abhorrent to me. I get your point that actually we do need to make sure that people are included within healthcare provision. And here you have a healthcare expert telling you, and who has acres of experience, that this situation where we're having the word person and sort of conflagrating various concepts textually will end up excluding a huge amount of the population who rely on this information.
We do have evidence in the clinical literature research recently emerged out of Durham that healthcare messaging that insists on a gender binary in this way does underserve people with gender who are
Dahlia,
a tiny percentage of the population compared to the 51%.
All right, Dahlia, I'm going to just bring in the guys over here. Lloyd.
I mean, I don't think there should be a ban on gendered language in NHS guidelines. Whether you're genderising or sexing the language, there's a slight difference there, woman or female. But where it's accurate, it should be used, and it should be allowed to be used. And where it needs to include more people, you can use alternative formulations. I don't think there should be a one-size-fits-all. Instead, we need to do case by case. For example, there may be many reasons why you don't want to say mother, because there might be two mothers in that relationship and you want to be clear on talking about the birthing parent. It might well be that it's a surrogate who doesn't consider themselves a mother because genetically is not the mother. So you want to use a term. So I just think that...
Are we overcomplicating it?
It needs to be the Royal Colleges and all the professionals to get together to work out what is the best. that we've got one professional here, but there's a whole
but she
swathe of other
represents, she says, a very large number.
Represents 1,200 out of the biggest staff in the world of any organisation, bar the Indian Railways. OK, so she represents a small group within that staff network. The experts need to get together and work it out.
Well, we've got one expert who's given...
for everyone. And then I think that this should not be a political discussion. What should be the political discussion is how we fund and support women with menopause. How we make sure that women's
Well,
health
then there
is
are
better
political
supported.
discussions about that. But let me get Saqib in.
Women with menopause,
No
right?
one's saying you can't.
Right, hang on.
That's exactly what I've said.
It's
is that
about
I think those words
accuracy.
should be able to be used.
Right.
If it suits you.
All right, but let me put a different question. Are women being discriminated by this advice?
Let me try and be the bridge of consensus across everyone.
Oh, Saqib, please.
There's a bit
very
of
generous
first
of
time
you,
in my life. Look, the thing is, this debate gets very heated, and my starting point in all this is obviously people who are transitioning should be given the utmost compassion. That should absolutely be the case. But we're hearing from a healthcare professional over there that on International Women's Day, I'm certainly not going to say we shouldn't have women on the websites. The Women's Health Strategy clearly sets out you should have sex-specific stuff. I would hope that the health professionals can use their common sense and professionalism to navigate the minority and not discriminate against the 51%.
Saqib, thank you. And thank you to you, Dr. Louise Irvin, for joining us today. And happy International Women's Day. Let's talk about the protests in France, because more than 1.2 million people have taken to the streets, marching in France to protest at the President Emmanuel Macron's plan to raise the pension age. Well, you could hear it there. The pension age from 62 to 64. Trade unions have called nationwide strikes, and demonstrations have been going on since the middle of January. You can see the pictures there clearly. Let's talk to Ranja Kanuni from the General Confederation of Labour Union, who is protesting, or they're protesting, on the streets of Paris today. Welcome to you. We've got a retirement age here, heading to 68. What have you got to complain about, people might ask here, Ranja?
Well, they want to put the age at 64, and 64 is the limit beyond which our health is not guaranteed, and we want our health to be good when we retire. So we complain about that. And we also complain about the fact that there is no necessity to go beyond 62. Even more, we want to go back to 60 because we have the means to finance it, and we want it. We want a model where we can be happy and healthy when we retire and not just be sick and wait to die.
Right.
So that's what we complain about.
Well, OK. I mean, Emmanuel Macron would say it's not affordable anymore. And these are changes that are happening all over the world. As I said, here in the UK, it's at 66. The pension age. It's going to 67 pretty shortly. It will be for me. And then a few years above it. Are you really not going to be able to get what you want?
Well, we think we can be able to get what we want, because what experts say is that it is affordable. There is a slight deficit that is planned in maybe 2030, but this deficit is very little. We have the funds to finance it, and we have ideas. For example, we are on the 8th of March. One idea is to pay women just as much as men. And you can bring billions to the table to finance our pensions. We can also raise salaries. It's our salary who contribute to the system. If we raise our salaries by 5%, 5% is less than the inflation, so it would be fair. And we would have the means to finance our pensions for 62 and not 64 years old. So why not do it?
Well, why not do it, Dahlia? Why people don't strike over pension age here, do they? And it's much higher than in France.
I mean, I think in Britain we have this very bizarre idea that democracy is only about what happens at the polls or what happens in the election booth, when really a healthy democratic culture is about economic democracy. It's about workplace democracy. It's about the right to protest.
There have been strikes on things like the poll tax. There have been strikes about university tuition fees, but not on this issue.
Well, absolutely. And I think that France... it has more of awareness of its people's history. We kind of learn our history as a series of kings and queens, but we have this rich history of, the charters, the levellers, the diggers, the poll tax, all of this, and we don't really learn that part of our history. But the fact is that we should be doing what the French are doing, because ultimately the French generally work fewer hours than us. They have larger holidays, and they're more productive. They're around 18% more productive than British workers. So clearly they're doing something right. And I think it's related to the fact that they like to go on strike.
Alex?
I do love the French. I'm a francophone and a francophile, and I can tell you right now that striking is a national sport in France. They love it. But there is a huge... It's interesting you talk about the cultural awareness and all the rest of it. And, of course, France is the country that beheaded a huge number of its elites a couple of centuries ago. And they actually do have a very different approach to life than we do. There's a reason why people talk about a Mediterranean lifestyle or a Gallic mindset as compared to the Anglo-Saxon.
But are they right on this
mentality?
issue?
Well, do you know what? I think pragmatically, as British people tend to be more pragmatic and more centre-right than our neighbours across the Channel, it's very obvious with an ageing population where the demographic pyramid is inverted, and essentially you've got a hugely ageing population with more complex health needs. Medicines are developing, but they need to be paid for. That's by the NHS in the UK compared to the system in France. And the state pension then has to afford these people. Pragmatically, actually, I think we are looking at a situation where the pension age is going to have to go up. But, you know, fair play to
I'll never retire.
They like a day off to eat their cheese, burn some tyres and wear a yellow vest.
Oh, no stereotypes there whatsoever. Lloyd, should Labour be making more of a fuss about the retirement age going up?
Well, at the moment, there's not been an agreement that the retirement age in this country will go up even further, although there are some rumours of that. And I think it's very unhelpful that there are rumours. We saw the mess of where women were, and when I say women, I mean women, were regraded in terms of their retirement age and not told about it and have lost out huge amounts of money. And that was totally wrong. What I actually think needs to happen, and what Labour has talked about in our last manifestos and we ongoing talk about, is about how we look at work-life balance more broadly throughout the whole period of your life. I think the idea that you work solidly until you drop at a certain age and then you stop is not a particularly fair
Well, what
way
about what
that we
Ranja's
work
suggesting?
anymore.
They go on strike. I mean, would you be encouraging people to do what she is saying is worthwhile?
You might have missed it, but we do have mass strikes in this country at the moment. And the UCU strike is partly about pension ages. The RMT strike is about wages, but it's also about further terms and conditions, including pension. So the idea that our workers are not taking action on strike, on pensions, is
but
not
should the
true.
Labour Party be advocating this against...
The Labour Party believes that we need a fairer deal for work-life balance, because at the moment it's not right, and it means that we're less productive because people have worked too hard until they drop, and actually it performs poorly for our country. And that's why our country is shrinking down in the international league tables.
Just to be clear, the strikes haven't passed me by, just in case you were worried about it. Do you think it's fair, Sakib, that the government may accelerate further increases in the age in which you can claim your state pension?
Well, look, there's a current review happening at the moment.
What do you think?
To see. Well, look, the age of 68, by the way, was actually a Labour Party. It was a Labour Party policy to get it to 68. So I think, look, I kind of agree with Alex on this, which is we are an ageing population. We are working longer. We are living longer. We're actually living healthier lives than we have in the past. You know, so I think the direction of travel is certainly on that. But actually, our pensions policy generally is done by consent. In a much more consensual way than you see in France, and that's why we see less strikes or fewer strikes because of that.
All right, Ranja, before we let you go, you're obviously travelling off somewhere. Are you surprised that there isn't more anger, more discussion and protest over this issue here?
Well, yes, because if they were asking us to work until 68, I mean, we would be burning everything down. 64 is already too much. And also, we have to take into consideration the climate, like working more, producing more, using more resources when everyone is telling us we should use less resources and we should slow down. The planet cannot keep up the pace that we have. We have to slow down. So why go on working forever?
Right.
Don't we have a life to live?
Well, I'll ask that to the panel, whether they have a life to live beyond working. Ranja Kanuni from the General Confederation of Labour Union in France. Thank you very much for joining us. Just briefly, have you got a life to live then, Lloyd, outside?
I want to live my life now, and I think it's right, people's right to be able to live their life well now and in retirement. And at the moment, they don't either in Britain.
Let's go into the chamber, take a look at gathering MPs in time for Prime Minister's questions. Oh, yes, it is certainly getting full. The Prime Minister facing questions from Keir Starmer, where he no doubt will raise the issue that we were talking about earlier on, which is about the new laws to try and stop the boats crossing the Channel. At this point, let's welcome viewers from BBC News Channel. As I said, Prime Minister's Questions is happening in a few minutes' time. But before it does, I just want to show our guests and our viewers this in the Daily Telegraph. Unless you've been hiding under a rock, you will have noticed that many WhatsApp messages from Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, have been given to the paper, and they have been appearing on a daily basis. Let's just show you this one. You can see the date there from 2020. Matt Hancock says, "I'm going to get stuck in and drive this roll out. The Prime Minister is completely right on this. Delegate, delegate, delegate." Simon Case, he's the top civil servant. The Cabinet Secretary, agree. "My concern is we can figure out how to test. What we don't know how to do is get people to isolate. We're losing this war because of behaviour. This is the thing we have to turn around," which probably also relies on people hearing about isolation from trusted local figures, not nationally, distrusted figures like the Prime Minister, sadly, talking about Boris Johnson. Is Simon Case safe in his job, do you think?
Well, look, that'll be a decision for the Civil Service and the Prime Minister. Clearly, the Prime Minister has backed Simon in recent times. But, I just think look, the WhatsApp leaks, I've started to lose track of them, if I'm honest with you. There were so many given.
You've only just started to lose track.
I just think, look, what possessed anyone to give over their WhatsApp messages is beyond me.
Right, but on this, do you think impartiality is being upheld, has been upheld at all times?
Well, in that environment, I'm sure there are lots of conversations that people wouldn't want aired, and decisions were obviously made in accordance to what was going on.
Yes, so what's wrong with that? No one thought these were going to actually come out. People say private things in WhatsApp messages, don't they?
Well, I think the fact that Simon Case has been an awful Cabinet Secretary should be the reason that he's sacked. This is probably a bit of him telling the truth, isn't it? That the PM was discredited. We now know that he was partying whilst others were locked down. Some of us knew that at the time. Simon Case invited me and my committee for a party, and we refused.
Let's go into the chamber for PMQs.
At home, we're taking huge strides to deliver equal opportunities for women, such as mandatory pay gap reporting and the landmark Domestic Abuse Act. And internationally, we have launched today a new Women and Girls strategy, which puts them at the heart of everything that we do. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 100 days ago, the Prime Minister promised to publish his tax returns. He still hasn't. People want transparency in our politics, especially because the Prime Minister is the richest Prime Minister in history and because of the concerns there have been. So why on earth hasn't the Prime Minister published his tax returns yet? When will he do so? And when he does so, will he include his US tax returns?
Mr. Speaker, as I previously confirmed, I will publish my tax returns, and that will be done very shortly.
Anthony Mangle.
Mr. Speaker, on International Women's Day, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on all the work that has been done on the Preventing Sexual Violence and Conflict Initiative and ensure that the UK continues to show its global leadership. Mr. Speaker, there are 250,000 people in this country living on park home sites. They are treated as second-class citizens by councils, where they pay council tax. They are treated poorly by managers who own the sites, and they are at a disadvantage to when we roll out our incredibly generous energy schemes. Can the Prime Minister ensure that we can actually give them more support and more help and reform the Homes Act?
My honourable friend is right that there is still more work to do to tackle problems with the sector. We are making progress in implementing changes, Mr. Speaker. Park owners' rights are now codified in writing with the site owner, and should those obligations not be met, residents can take site owners to a tribunal. Local authorities also now have powers to take enforcement action, and we will continue to support them to improve protection for park home residents everywhere.
Now comes the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And today, on International Women's Day, we celebrate the successes of women in our society. It's a crying shame that as we do so, we face legislation which drives a coach and horses through our world-leading modern slavery framework, which protects women from exploitation. Mr. Speaker, in the last decade, this government has introduced 5 plans to tackle illegal immigration, 5 utter failures. The problem just gets worse with every new gimmick. The Home Secretary says the public are sick of tough talk and inadequate action. Does he agree with her assessment of this government's record?
Well, Mr. Speaker, what the honourable gentleman fails to recognise that there is a global migration problem. We are not alone in facing these challenges, and it is precisely because that across Europe the numbers escalating to the extent they are, we have brought forward new plans because we are determined, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that this remains a compassionate and generous country, that is done fairly and legally. That's why we will break the criminal gangs, Mr. Speaker. We've announced new agreements with Albania and France, tougher immigration enforcement, and now new legislation that makes it clear that if you come here illegally, you will be detained and swiftly removed. But, Mr. Speaker, what we haven't heard is the honourable gentleman's plan. We know what it is. It's open-door immigration and unlimited asylum. Whilst he may be on the side of the people smugglers, we're on the side of the British people.
Mr. Speaker, if he was serious about stopping the boats, he'd actually steal our plan on stopping the boats, smash the gangs, sort out the returns, and clean up the utter mess. Mr. Speaker.
I'm going to hear this, and nobody's going to... I wouldn't if I were you. I think we've heard enough. I want to hear the questions and the answers, and it won't be interrupted.
Mr. Speaker, nobody on this side of the House wants open borders. On that side, they've lost control of the borders. Now, he's promised the country that this bill will stop all small boat crossings. No ifs, no buts. Sounds like more talk. So in the interest of adequate action, when will he achieve that?
Well, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we'll be implementing this plan as soon as we can pass it through Parliament. So I look forward to the honourable gentleman's support. But the reality is, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, the honourable gentleman has been on the wrong side of this.
Prime Minister, Mr. Stafford, if you don't want to hear him, you can go and have a good cup of tea, nice and strong, I suspect. But I will hear him, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman has been on the wrong side of this issue his entire career. He described all immigration law as racist. He said it was a mistake to control immigration. And he has never, ever voted for tougher asylum laws. It is clear, Mr. Speaker, while he's in hock to the open border activists, we're on the side of the British people.
Mr. Speaker, when I was in charge of prosecutions, I extradited countless rapists, and the conviction rate for people smuggling was twice what it is today. I voted against his legislation last time because I said it wouldn't work. Since it became law, the numbers have gone up. He's proved me right. He should be apologising, not gloating. The Prime Minister says they will detain people who aren't eligible to claim asylum here and then return them. Well, they already tried that under the last legislation. Last year, 18,000 people were deemed ineligible to apply for asylum. That's the easy bit, the talk. But as for the action, Prime Minister, how many of them have actually been returned?
Mr. Speaker, as a result of the plans we brought forward, we have almost doubled the number of people returned this year. But he talked about laws. He talked about.
I think the front bench needs to be a little quieter because I want to hear, and I don't need you joining in. I'm going to. Our constituents want to hear the importance of Prime Minister's questions, both the questions and the answers. Show our constituents the respect they're due. Come on, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he asked about arrests. He asked about our laws. Actually, when I was in Dover yesterday talking to our law enforcement officials, what did they tell me? Precisely because of the law that the Conservative government passed last year, they have now been able to arrest more than double the number of people they did before. 397 in the last 6 months. But stopping the boats, Mr. Speaker, stopping the boats is not just my priority, it is the people's priority. But his position... His position on this is clear. He wanted to, in his words, scrap the Rwanda deal. He voted against measures to deport foreign criminals, Mr. Speaker, and he even argued against deportation flights. Well, and we know why, because on this matter, he talked about his legal background. He's just another lefty lawyer standing in our way.
We'll continue. When you keep shouting, it prolongs, and some of you are trying to catch my eye. When you're disappointed, I don't want any complaints. Let's get through these questions so we might get some backbenching.
Mr. Speaker, all that nonsense because he doesn't want to answer the question. Because he knows what the answer is. The number is 21. I thought he was a man of detail. 21 people out of the 18,000. And what happens to the rest? They sit in hotels and digs for months on end at the taxpayers' expense. Last year, he promised to end the hotel farce. That's the talk. But because of his mess, there are thousands of people who can't claim asylum and can't be returned. So where does he actually think they're going to end up?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about the pressure on our asylum system, right? We've actually got a clear plan to stop people coming here in the first place. Mr. Speaker, Labour have absolutely no plan on this issue because they simply don't want to tackle the problem. We introduced tougher sentences for people smugglers. They opposed it. We signed a deal with Rwanda. They opposed it. We are deporting foreign offenders as we speak. They oppose it.
Order. I'm going to say to the member from Hull, save that good voice for the rugby match. You might be able to join Mr Stafford over that strong cup of tea, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in fact, he opposed every single step of what we've done to try and stop this problem. In fact, his only contribution to this debate, well, we know what it is. In his own words, what did he say? We will defend free movement. That's the Labour Party for you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he stood there last year saying exactly the same thing. We said it wouldn't work. They passed the law. The numbers went up. Absolutely deluded. He can't say where they'll return people because they spent 140 million on Rwanda and it doesn't work. They can't say how they'll return people because this bill doesn't come with a single new return agreement. And they can't say when they'll fix the mess because it's more talk, more gimmicks, more promises to be broken. Now, a few months ago, I put to him that of the people who arrived on small boats, only 4% had been processed. He stood there and said, that's unacceptable. What's the number now?
Mr. Speaker, as a result of what we've done, there are now 6,000 fewer people in the caseload of asylum backlog. We're hiring more caseworkers. We're increasing their productivity. And again, he's mistaken when it comes to returns, Mr. Speaker, because we do have returns agreements with India, with Pakistan, with Serbia, with Nigeria, and crucially, now with Albania, where we are returning hundreds of people, Mr. Speaker. But look, our position on this is clear. If you arrive here illegally, you will not be able to claim asylum here. You will not be able to access the modern slavery system, and you will not be able to make spurious human rights claims. That is the right thing to do. But he's going on and on about process, hiding behind process, because he doesn't want to confront the substance. We are the party of fairness, and he represents the party of free movement.
I thought he was supposed to be the man of detail. He's gone to all that lengths to avoid the detail. He knows the answer to the question. Less than 1% of those arrived by boats have been processed. He shakes his head. It's the government's own statistic. On his watch, processing of those boat cases has gone from unacceptable, in his words, to almost non-existent. And doesn't that tell you everything you need to know? After 13 years, small boat crossings higher than ever, claims unprocessed, the taxpayer paying for hotel rooms, criminal gangs running all the way laughing to the bank, and an asylum system utterly broken on his watch. This is their 5th Prime Minister, their 6th immigration plan, their 7th Home Secretary, and after all this time, all they offer is the same old gimmicks and empty promises. Now, I don't agree with the Home Secretary on very much, but when she says that the Tories are all talk and no action, she's spot on, isn't she?
Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, illegal immigration enforcement up. The amount of people processing claims up. The backlog is down. The number of returns agreements is up. Hundreds of people returned to Albania, and now new laws to detain and deter illegal migrants. It's clear what we stand for, Mr. Speaker. We're doing what's right. We are acting with compassion. We are acting with fairness, and we are acting to respect the laws and borders of our country. We are delivering what we said, and it's crystal clear listening to this, Mr. Speaker, that it's going to be the Conservatives and only the Conservatives that stop the boat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Graphic lessons on oral sex, how to choke your partner safely, and 72 genders. This is what passes for relationships and sex education in British schools. Across the country, children are being subjected to lessons that are age inappropriate, extreme, sexualising and inaccurate, often using resources from unregulated organisations that are actively campaigning to undermine parents. This is not a victory for equality, it is a catastrophe for childhood. Will my right honourable friend honour his commitment to end inappropriate sex education by commissioning an independent inquiry into the nature and extent of this safeguarding scandal?
Can I say I share my honourable friend's concerns and thank her for her work in this area. That's why I've asked the Department for Education to ensure that schools are not teaching inappropriate or contested content in RSHE. Our priority should always be the safety and well-being of children, and schools should also make curriculum content and materials available to parents. As a result of all of this, we are bringing forward a review of RSHE statutory guidance, and we'll start our consultation as soon as possible.
SNP Leader Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, on International Women's Day, can I ask the Prime Minister to reconfirm that under his proposed new asylum laws, a woman who is sex trafficked to the UK on a small boat by a criminal gang will not be afforded protection under our modern slavery laws?
Mr. Speaker, it's precisely because we want to target our compassion and our resources on the world's most vulnerable people that we must get a grip of this system and break.
Can I just say to the SNP, it's quite right the questions are asked, but I also want to hear the answers. Shouting from up there is not helping anybody. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, as I said, it's precisely because we want to target our resources and our compassion on the world's most vulnerable people that we need to get a grip of this system, make sure that we have control over our borders, make sure our system and resources are not overwhelmed so that we can help the people most in need. There is nothing fair, there is nothing compassionate about sustaining a system where, as we saw recently, people are dying on these crossings. That is not right, and our plans will stop that from happening.
Mr. MacDonald, I don't need to hear you chunnering all the way through. You can be joining the others for a cup of tea. Come on, Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I'll take that as a yes from the Prime Minister that women who are the victims of sex trafficking will not be protected under our modern slavery laws. What a complete and utter disgrace, Mr. Speaker. But whilst it may shock, it shouldn't necessarily surprise, because this is the Tory government that in recent months has spoken of invasions. Just yesterday, this was the Tory government that said that 100 million people could be coming to these shores. And this is the Tory government that this morning said that number could in fact be billions. Complete and utter nonsense. So may I ask the Prime Minister, from whom are his government taking inspiration? Nigel Farage or Enoch Powell?
Mr. Speaker. And what a load of nonsense, Mr. Speaker. What a load of nonsense. No, in fact, the figure of 100 million, it doesn't come from the government. It comes from the United Nations, Mr. Speaker. and it illustrates the scale of the global migration crisis that the world is grappling with, which is why it is right that we take action, Mr. Speaker, because if we do not, the numbers will continue to grow. They have more than quadrupled in just 2 years. It's a sign of what is to come, and our system will continue to be overwhelmed. And if that happens, we will not be able to help the people who are most in need of our support, our generosity, and our compassion. This has always been the way of this country, and once we get a grip of this system, that's who we can extend our support to, and that's why it's the right legislation.
Lip down.
Last year, the UK economy grew at the fastest rate in the G7 of 4.1%, while at the same time, greenhouse gas emissions fell by 3.4%, more than comparable countries. To maintain this momentum ahead of the net zero strategy refresh, will he encourage my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, to use his budget statement next week to stimulate investment in renewable energy projects by renewable energy companies, both offshore and onshore, to improve our energy security, reduce reliance on more expensive fossil fuels, and ultimately reduce bills for households?
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud of our commitment to scaling up renewable energy sources. Renewables make up now nearly 40% of our electricity supply, a fourfold increase since 2011. My honourable friend will know that I cannot and will not preempt budget decisions, but he is a powerful champion for the environment in this House, and I've no doubt that he'll make his views known to the Chancellor.
Ed Davey.
Joining the tributes on International Women's Day and pay a special tribute to the women in this House, past and present, who helped shape the future of our country. Mr. Speaker, when Jean rang 999, she was told she would have to wait at least 8 hours for an ambulance. So she got in her car and drove herself to Eastbourne District General Hospital. She paid for parking and made it to the entrance of A&E, where she collapsed. Jean died an hour later. Mr. Speaker, no one should lose their mother or grandmother like that. So will the Prime Minister apologise to Jean's family and to all those who've lost loved ones due to the government's appalling ambulance delays?
Well, Mr. Speaker, of course, my thoughts and condolences go to Jean and Jean's family for what's happened. It's absolutely right that we continue to make progress on improving the performance in urgent emergency care. We outlined plans to do this just the other month, and I'm pleased to say that we are seeing performance improve, whether it's waits in A&E or ambulance performance times, a considerably marked improvement over the last several weeks compared to the peak pressures that we saw over the winter due to COVID and flu. And because of the investments we're putting in more ambulances, more doctors and nurses, and more discharge, I'm confident that we will continue to make progress to getting the care that we all expect and need to see.
Joe Gideon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since its release earlier this year, the heartwarming and inspiring story of Dave Fishwick's journey to set up a community bank has quickly risen to be one of Netflix's top films. Last week in the Chamber, I called for more initiatives, such as the Bank of Dave, to support local communities across the UK. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that financial inclusion is an essential part of levelling up opportunities in our communities? And will he meet with me and Dave to discuss how we can replicate his success story in other areas such as Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, Mr. Speaker, community-focused banks and non-bank lenders, like the Burnley Savings and Loans, have a vital role to play in ensuring that everyone can access affordable credit. That's why we've made it quicker and easier for new banks to enter the market, and the new bank startup unit was created several years ago, and now 30 new banks have been authorised. I will ensure that my honourable friend gets the meeting with the Exchequer Secretary to discuss this issue further.
Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. BBC Radio 4's You and Yours have exposed queue-jumping online touts who've been buying up Eurovision tickets and putting them on sale for thousands of pounds on dodgy sites like Viagogo. In this year, when we are hosting Eurovision on behalf of war-ravaged Ukraine, this latest example of rampant rip-off culture in Tory Britain is particularly despicable. Why hasn't his government done more to support? Why hasn't his government done more to support genuine fans over the rip-off merchants, the spivs? and their ticket touts.
Well, Mr. Speaker, actually, we will continue. We have put in place measures to combat ticket touting. I'm happy to look at the documentary that he mentioned and make sure that we're doing everything we can do, and I'll talk to the Home Secretary about it. But more generally, it is a source of enormous pride for us to host Eurovision. I know it's something that everyone is looking forward to, and we should ensure that there is the broadest possible access to seeing that, and we'll do everything we can to make sure that that happens.
David Davis.
Mr. Speaker, in the aftermath of 9/11, the British government signed an extradition treaty with the United States with the intention of covering terrorism and violent crime. Since it came into force in 2003, the US has extradited 83 people to the UK. We've sent 225 to America, and 3/4 of those have been for non-violent and largely white-collar alleged crimes. There's a fundamental unfairness at the heart of our extradition treaty, and it was shown by the fact that Anna Sakoulas refused to come to face trial for the killing of Harry Dunn. The unfair treaty is compounded by an American system which coerces British citizens and gives them an unfair trial. In the last 2 decades, the American policy has been rather like an international commercial policy. Correcting this is important. Will the Prime Minister look at this treaty with a view to correcting this parity of justice?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my right honourable friend for his question. Obviously, it's in our national interest to have effective extradition relationships, and under the treaty we have with the US, we've secured the extradition and subsequent conviction of terrorists, murderers, rapists and child sex offenders. I'm happy to meet with him to discuss this issue further. As he knows, the US has refused, I think, 1 UK extradition, and the US has refused 1 UK extradition request, and the UK has refused 27. But I know that he has concerns, and I'd be happy to meet him to discuss this further.
McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a stark correlation between areas off the gas grid and those with the highest rates of fuel poverty. It's worse in Scotland, ironically, in those areas closest to the national gas reserves in the North Sea, but also in urban deprived areas where multi-storey flats are deprived of the ability of having natural gas. Being off the gas grid means that you're dependent on currently unregulated fuels such as heating oil that have risen far faster than electricity and gas, or being dependent upon old and inefficient and very costly all-electric systems. Will the Prime Minister end this by ensuring that all fuels are regulated, and also by ensuring that these households that are all-electric are able to get the alternative fuel payment?
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, as someone who represents a rural constituency with many people off gas grid, I appreciate the concern the honourable gentleman raises, but that's why that's always been uppermost in the government's mind as we've designed and implemented our support for people with energy bills, notably doing that based on electricity meters rather than gas, but also putting in place the alternative fuel support payment of £200, and we're making sure that that gets to everyone who needs it.
Richard Bacon.
Mr. Speaker, the adjustments to the dental contract last November were a very welcome step, but there is more work to do. Will the Prime Minister therefore keep this area under the very closest review to ensure that constituents such as mine in South Norfolk and those of other honourable members get the best possible dental care?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises an excellent point, and I can tell him that we are continuing to invest in NHS dentistry, £3 billion a year, but we've also enabled practices to do 10% more activity on top of their contracts and remove the barriers so that hygienists and other therapists can continue to work to their full skill set. The number of NHS dentists has increased by about 500 over last year, and we'll continue to work with the sector to see what more we can do.
Rosie Duffield.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As today is International Women's Day, does the Prime Minister agree with me that voters in the run-up to May's local elections have every right to ask candidates who are standing for a position of responsibility in local government questions relating to women's rights? And does he believe that as representatives of their political parties, all candidates must answer those questions honestly, politely and with respect while standing on a voter's doorstep?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady makes an excellent point, and I wholeheartedly agree with her. these are important questions. Voters deserve to have clear and straightforward answers to them, and I hope that she can continue to put her campaign forward. She'll have my full support, and I hope in the local elections we can debate these issues in the way that they should be.
Chris Watts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last weekend, I had the pleasure of being auctioned off for the Conservative Women's Organisation. No returns. On this International Women's Day, will my right honourable friend join me in paying tribute to the excellent work the CWO do to get more women, Conservative women, into politics, and pay tribute to all the remarkable women who support us in the work we do, especially, because she's in the gallery, my mum.
Mr. Speaker, can I congratulate first of all my honourable friend for his successful auction? I assume it wasn't his mother that bid for him successfully, but also pay tribute to her, but also pay tribute to the work of the Conservative Women's Organisation for the fantastic work they do. We need more women standing in local and national politics, and everyone who is working to bring that about deserves our praise and thanks, and long may it continue.
Sir Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On today's International Women's Day, research published by pensions company Scottish Widows has shown that a woman retiring today would have to work to the age of 81 to achieve a pension fund parity with her male counterpart. And as every bit is worrying, a woman in the workplace today, aged 25, can still expect to retire with a pension fund £100,000 on average lesser than her male counterparts. Yep. With all of the fiscal and social policy levers at his disposal, can the Prime Minister tell us how he is going to set a course to shut that gap over what remains of his premiership?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the government takes the issue of the gender pensions gap incredibly seriously, and we've delivered groundbreaking pension reforms and major progress. Automatic enrolment has in fact helped millions more women save into the pension, and pensions participation among eligible women in the private sector was 87% in the last available year, up from just 40% a few years ago. And we remain committed to the measures in the 2017 review, and will continue to give this issue all the attention it deserves until we can close the gap.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Grimsby Town Football Club has reached the quarter-finals of the FA Cup. The last time the team achieved that was in 1939, which by coincidence was the previous time that the town had a Conservative MP. Now I know that Grimsby beats the Prime Minister's team of Southampton to get to this next stage, but would he join with me in congratulating the team and wishing them the best of luck when they play against Brighton and Hove Albion in the next stage?
Mr. Speaker, it pains me, although I will say congratulations to the Honourable Lady and Grimsby for their victory over Southampton, and I now have a new team to support in the Cup, and she'll have my full support. I wish them well against their next match and look forward to cheering her and all her colleagues on.
Steve McKay.
Mr. Speaker, I've heard the Prime Minister talk fondly about helping out in his mum's community pharmacy. How will we feel if 600 of them close this year because of a vicious NHS contract which takes no account of rising costs and is forcing many into bankruptcy?
Mr. Speaker, I praise the work that our community pharmacies do. They're fantastic at being on the front line of delivering primary care. And as I've said previously, the government is exploring ways in which we can support them to do even more, because I think improving access to pharmacies is something that people would both welcome and would help people get the care that they need faster and more efficiently. And we'll continue to look at all the proposals that have been given to us.
Kelly Thomas.
For more than 2 years, an illegal waste site has been operating in the village of Borstal. Tipper lorries covering their number plates as they thunder onto the site at all hours of the day and night, blighting the lives of the residents that live directly by and creating untold environmental damage. I thank the DEFRA team for their engagement with the Environment Agency so far, but no action has been taken. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that enough is enough and swift multi-agency action should be taken to stop and shut down illegal and criminal activity such as this?
Well, can I thank my right honourable friend for raising this issue. The government is committed to tackling waste crime, and the Joint Unit for Waste Crime brings together agencies in the way that she described. I am aware she's met the local Environment Agency director about this particular issue, but I will also ensure that she gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss this further.
Matt Rodder.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my constituent Ollie Stevens was just 13 years old when he was stabbed and brutally murdered in a local park just yards from his home. The two boys who attacked him had shared dozens of pictures of knives online before the attack. So could the Prime Minister explain to me why the government's removed measures to tackle this sort of dreadful online content from the Online Safety Bill?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very sorry to hear about the case that the honourable gentleman raises. My thoughts are with Ollie's family. He's absolutely right that we should do everything we can to tackle the scourge of knife crime, and that's why, for instance, this government brought forward new powers to improve the police's use of stop and search, which has made a major difference, and actually violent crime is now down considerably over the past few years. The Online Safety Bill also goes further than any other country has gone to make sure that we are protecting children online. I'm happy to look at the specific issue that he mentions, but it's been praised by the Children's Commissioner and others for being a groundbreaking law that will do wonders to improve children's safety.
Daniel Hutchins.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State for DEFRA will be visiting Shrewsbury at the end of this month at my invitation, and she will hear the tremendous progress to date from the River Severn Partnership and the Environment Agency that we are working to try to find a holistic solution to managing Britain's longest river, the River Severn. We are now experiencing flooding in Shrewsbury on an annual basis, with tremendous economic damage as a result. Will he take an interest, please, and secure additional funding for DEFRA so that we can finally tame these rivers and protect our communities from annual flooding?
This is an issue that my honourable friend has raised before, and he's right to do so. The government has doubled double investment in flood defences over this Parliament to £5.2 billion. I know the DEFRA Secretary will have her visit, we'll talk to him and his communities, and I look forward to hearing back from her after that.
We're going to leave Prime Minister's questions at this point. If anything significant develops, we will, of course, bring it to you. Let's introduce our guests for this part of Politics Live. For the government, we have the Transport Minister, Richard Holden, Labour leader in the House of Lords, Baroness Angela Smith, and the BBC's chief political correspondent, Nick Eardley. There was just a little note at the very beginning of Prime Minister's questions, which you might have missed, which was Rishi Sunak repeating his promise to publish his tax returns. I don't know when that's going to be, but he did say in due course. But the substance from Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, was unsurprisingly about the policy, the new illegal immigration bill unveiled by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, yesterday, about which we have discussed an awful lot, and that is stopping the small boats. Keir Starmer said it was just gimmicks, more gimmicks, and there was no evidence that any of it would work. To which, actually, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was quite personal in his responses to Keir Starmer, saying that he was part of the sort of left-wing lawyers, people blocking the government's attempt to do something which is of concern to people. What did you make of it, Nick?
You get the impression that Rishi Sunak's kind of found his stride a bit more at Prime Minister's questions in the last few weeks. I think he's starting to enjoy it. But there was this sense that when you found out it was going to be Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer up every week, some people thought it might be a bit dull, and I don't think it has been. I think that was pretty personal, actually, the lefty lawyer stuff. And you do get the impression that in the way that Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer didn't like each other, that this is turning into quite a fraught relationship over the dispatch box as well. I'm not sure we learnt much.
No.
But certainly more of a sense of what the dividing line on this issue of small boats is going to be.
Richard Holden, what makes you think it'll work?
Well, the Immigration Act. Well, I think we've seen a huge move over the last few years to try and clamp down on this. We've started to see the returns to Albania in this last year. Hundreds of people have gone back. But it's quite clear that what we've seen is a shift from people coming through the tunnel, through lorries, which was the issue a few years ago.
Yeah.
And now we've seen that shift to the small boats. We've got to have a robust system to deal with it. And I think that this denial of people to be able to claim asylum and then being told that they will not be able to return to the UK, just like Australia and America, I think we've got to have a hardline approach on this. It's something
but that was in the other bill. Those words you've just used were in the Nationality and Borders bill a year ago. It was exactly the same wording. It is slightly tougher, this bill, but it's the same, and there has been very little success.
It is tougher, and it won't allow people to return to the UK. I think we have to have a proper approach on it, which stops people being able to come to the UK and then trying to come back again and again. People are travelling. We've got to remember, people are coming to the UK in small boats from safe countries, from Belgium and France. There's absolutely no need to take that channel crossing at all. And what I don't understand is why, if Labour, I don't know what Labour's position on it is at the moment, and so, it'd be really interesting to hear from them whether they're going to support it or not, because it's such a crucial issue for so many of our constituents.
Well, on that point, what will you do in the House of Lords? How far will you go, Angela Smith, to obstruct this bill?
Well, let's first start with the basic issue, the problem. I feel like it's Groundhog Day, because we've heard all this before, time and time again. And where I fundamentally disagree with Richard, I don't think this actually attacks the main issue, the big issue, which I can see nothing in this bill to address, I've looked at it already, is stopping the boats coming over in the first place.
Deterrent.
It's all very well saying we're returning people back to third countries and safer countries, but only, if you look at the figures, it's minimal. 21 have been returned where they've come from third countries.
So what would be the deterrent from Labour?
The deterrent for us, firstly, is you really have to, as Keir says today, smash these criminal gangs. There's nothing here that really addresses that. And unless you get to that part of it, we think about 3/4 of them have operated in this country. Well, first of all, you have a special unit within the National Crime Agency that is working here, is funded here separately, and is working internationally. Because if you don't deal with that, these gangs are going to continue. They are making millions and millions
Although
and
people
millions
are being
out of
returned
this.
to Albania, which many people feel is through
Do you know how
these
many?
people trafficking
We're talking
gangs.
about really small numbers here, nowhere near this. Only 1% of those that are coming over in small boats are actually being processed. 1%. It's gone down from where it was.
Well, you've explained the problem.
Well,
I'm going to come back on the
I think
problem.
it's quite of a shock for the government to find out the Conservatives have been in power for the last 13 years. They keep saying it's getting worse. It's getting worse and worse under this government.
Labour votes against everything we've tried to do in this space.
It's a frustration we have because we want something that works. People are dying.
The key thing that
people are dying. The borders are being.
The key thing is we have to
ways.
stop the pull factors, and that the pull factor at the moment is if you get to the UK, you'll be stuck in a system which is then
which has got huge backlogs, bigger
indeed,
than ever,
and it's abused by elements of the legal system as well. It's quite clear on that. We can see what's happened around
under a Conservative government.
We can see what people have tried to do with the modern slavery legislation, which was there to tackle a specific problem, and is actually now being more broadly abused.
Can I suggest something?
We have to tackle some of those issues.
I can help you here.
And part of it has got to be by pushing the legislation through as quickly as possible. It's coming second reading next week, and I hope the Labour Party
So why not support it? Why not support it and change it?
Well, we'll try and change it, and that's what the role we'll take. But in the Lords, we always do that. The frustration is it doesn't deal with the issue. One of the things you could.
Well, hang on. How do you know?
Let me say one of the things that would be really, really helpful would be to fast track those people coming from safe countries. Why isn't that in this bill? Why is there nothing that tackles the boats coming
Everybody's
over?
coming from a safe country. They're all coming from France or Belgium.
Yeah, so why not fast-track some of those? You're returning fewer than you returned 2 years ago.
That would be over 45,000.
Well, the issue around the coming through third countries, only 21 have been returned. But safe countries could be fast-tracked straight away. We're not fast-tracking when we need to. We're not putting the resources in to deal with the backlog. It's getting worse and worse. And just having strong language and we'll stop this, it doesn't
I'm not interested in strong language. I'm interested
Yes, you are. That's what's
I'm
in
interested
here.
in action because in my constituency has got an immigration removal centre which has been completed since the last general election. Every single week I have protesters there, including the local neighbouring Labour MP, to say, no, we shouldn't be trying to remove people from the UK. They should be allowed to stay. It's absolutely outrageous. You get this weak language from the Labour High Command.
This is not weak language,
who allow their MPs out.
Well, you've mentioned language. You've mentioned language. Let me just show. Hang on, Angela. Let me just show you this from Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary. We tried to stop the small boat crossings without changing our laws. She's talking about this bill pushing at the boundaries of international laws. But an activist blob of left-wing lawyers, civil servants and the Labour Party blocked us. So today we're changing our laws and bringing the small boat crossings to an end. Now, the union representing civil servants has taken umbrage at that. I mean, is that language helpful, Richard?
I think we need to be really forthright in this area. We need to push the...
Are civil servants civil servants that are helping government ministers formulate this legislation? You say that they're the problem.
Well, you know, I'm sure we'll get on to civil servants who are moving over into political roles at some point in this discussion. Well, but I think the issue here is that we've got to stop it. Labour try and say one thing in public, but actually out on the ground in constituencies like mine, Labour are trying to stop deportations. I've seen letters signed by dozens of Labour MPs stopping deportations of murderers and rapists.
Right, but what about civil servants?
Come on, you're getting to very difficult territory here. You have sent back fewer convicted criminals.
Constantly get...
Hang on, Richard. Hang on, Richard.
It's all you say, it's because of the law. The government is not dealing with the problem. We're hearing hard rhetoric, hard language. We've got to tackle the problem. You're not. The huge frustration for the Labour Party is we have a plan, and we would work with you on this if anyone would ever listen, to try and... You've got to stop the boats coming, fast-track the cases, get decisions, and return people who aren't able to be here.
I think the true frustration for the Labour Party is that you guys really want open borders and will do everything possible to frustrate...
Hang on, what?
Can I just... I want to challenge this.
Richard, all right, well, that's a question. You say that Labour would like to have open borders. Angela, dissuade him of that.
Well, he knows it's not true, just thinks it's a good line.
Hang on.
He also said today, and you heard what he said today, there's a huge frustration for us. People are dying. Why would you think we would want these small boats crossings to continue? Well, the humanitarian issues, the security issues...
Why did he campaign on it when he wanted to be leader, then?
Well, he didn't say that.
He said he wanted open borders.
What he's talking about is people being able to work. That is very different. This is illegal migration you're talking about. You're not tackling
all of these people are travelling illegally from Europe.
You are not dealing with the problem. You are using rhetoric and you are using fake language.
All right, but from Labour MPs in my own constituency.
All right, but hang on, Angela.
I've got the House of Commons and the House of Lords.
Today,
it's constant.
Don't talk over each other, because we've had this problem yesterday because people can't hear you.
But the Home Secretary this morning on the radio says we are testing novel interpretations of the law when she was asked if this was legal. I think if you want to deal with this, you have to use some humanity, and you used to have a proper use of the law to stop these criminal gangs. They are operating here. There is nothing in here. There is nothing in here that deals with that.
Well, let him respond.
We have huge humanity. We've been welcoming people from Hong Kong facing oppression from the Chinese government, people from Afghanistan, people from Syria, people from Ukraine. Over 500,000 people have come in. What we're trying to do is stop people trying to abuse our asylum system, try and bypass the normal routes that every other legal economic migrant comes through, right, by crossing the channel in small boats. At every step, when we try and do that, or try and deport people, the Labour Party will try and stop us at every single stage. Labour MPs constantly writing letters to say, don't deport these people. Lawyers trying to intervene at every stage. We have to get beyond that, and we have to have a robust
hang on,
approach.
Angela. On that, you mentioned the Labour Party. I mean, they're the opposition. I suppose that's fair enough. Civil servants, do you include them in this blob that Suella Braverman was talking about?
I think Suella is making the broad and clear point, especially in the light of what's happened with the move of Sue Gray over the last week, when you've seen somebody move from a very senior position of government, right, and with no answers at all as to when these discussions taken place, how many months have been going on for, over to a very senior position for the leader of the opposition. That obviously raises really serious
All right, well,
issues,
just briefly on Sue Gray.
There's two things I want to raise.
Hang on Afghanistan, I will say, those schemes now aren't functioning in the way they were. They were in place at the time of evacuation, and people can judge on whether they were a success or not. On Sue Gray, this is the senior civil servant who was in charge of the investigation into Boris Johnson over parties, and then subsequently the Privileges Committee review as to whether he misled. Now is taking a job as the Chief of Staff with the Labour Party. When did those discussions begin?
I genuinely don't know, but Jo Coburn will have that information today. But she is not the first to have gone from civil service to political life. David Frost, who's a minister in the Lords, was a diplomat and went as a special advisor, a political advisor, and then to a minister. But she's the first to get this abuse. But can I just say on Afghanistan?
No, because we haven't really. Well, I've said on Afghanistan, we've talked about it. We've talked about it so long.
Illegal. They would not be allowed in.
I want to. Hang on.
We had a specific scheme for them.
Yeah. All right, Richard. I just want to show you this from Gary Lineker, obviously the BBC football presenter. He tweeted this. There's no huge influx. He's talking about refugees and asylum seekers. We take far fewer refugees than any other major European countries. This is just an immeasurably cruel policy directed at the most vulnerable people in language that is not dissimilar to that used by Germany in the 30s. And I'm out of order, he questions. Should he be sacked, Richard?
Look, I think that that's a matter for the BBC, but it's quite clear to me that he needs to stop tweeting about this sort of thing because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Britain took over 500,000 refugees from Hong Kong, from Ukraine, from Syria and elsewhere. We've had special schemes to look after them. What we don't want to see is people trying to bypass the systems we want in place.
Sure, but Craig, hang on. But Craig McKinley, just to go back to Gary Lineker, you say he should stop tweeting. Your colleague Craig McKinley has said he should go.
Well, Craig's a backbencher and I'm a government minister, and there's a degree of government oversight of the BBC.
Right. Well, I hate to disappoint you, but Gary Lineker has tweeted to say he's going to continue tweeting on this subject. He's received an awful lot of support.
I really think he shouldn't, and I think the BBC needs to look at this because it's to try and compare a country who's taken 500,000 people from some war-torn countries across the world, including being at the forefront of the war against Putin's evil regime, right, in Russia, and we were the ones there back in 2015 when nobody else was standing up against them. I think it's quite outrageous that he would make those sorts of comparisons. I think he needs probably to start to think about what he's saying before he tweets.
All right, we're going to talk about the leadership contest in the SNP, obviously following First Minister Nicola Sturgeon's decision to step down, effectively resign. There was the first SNP leadership debate on STV last night. Humza Yousaf, Kate Forbes and Ash Regan all setting out their visions for Scotland as they battle it out to succeed Nicola Sturgeon. We're going to be talking to Humza Yousaf. There he is. Hello to you in just a moment. But before we do, we're just going to hear a bit of the debate and this from Kate Forbes, who questioned Humza's record as a Scottish Government minister.
Well, Humza, you've had a number of jobs in government. When you were Transport Minister, the trains were never on time. When you were Justice Minister, the police were strained to breaking point. And now, as Health Minister, we've got record high waiting times. What makes you think you can do a better job as First Minister?
Well, with colleagues like that, Humza, you really don't need any enemies. Anyway, but what do you say to Kate Forbes' questions?
I'm going to answer that in just a second, if you don't mind. But I just wanted to say, having watched PMQs and listened to the discussion that just ensued, I cannot tell you how thoroughly dispiriting, depressing and upsetting it is.
Right, but Humza, I'm going to interrupt because we haven't got you for very long and I want to concentrate on the debate, the leadership contest.
I will. I just wanted to make that point. So, yes, on the leadership debate, I'll be very clear. I've said from day one that I will run a positive campaign. It does nobody any good, neither the party nor the movement nor the country, to talk down a progressive track record of the SNPs that has won us election after election after election. Other candidates may not be happy to stand on that record, even though they've been in government for that time. I'm very proud to stand on that record, my own record, which has seen me, of course, re-elected just
You're absolutely right about re-election, but let's have a look at that record. Let's test some of the domestic policy, because under your tenure, hospital waiting times have been getting worse, with A&E waiting times becoming the worst they've ever been. So, yes, you've been re-elected, but how can the public trust you when, as Kate Forbes said, you haven't done what you promised when it came to health?
No, that's incorrect, actually. Let's remember that,
of course, have hospital
Scotland,
waiting times got worse?
I'll come back to that in a second. Listen, the entire United Kingdom, the entire world, health systems right across the world, of course, have suffered from the effects of a global pandemic. Probably the biggest shock the NHS has faced in its 74-year existence. What's happened under my leadership? COVID booster programme, the fastest in the entire UK. Scotland, of course, remains the only country in the UK where nurses, where paramedics, ambulance staff haven't gone on a single day strike, because I have managed to reach out, bring them to the table, compromise and offer them a fair
But you would accept that waiting times have got worse, even with those mitigating factors, as you have said. So what would you do differently as First Minister to get waiting times down as a key issue?
Well, we are working on getting waiting times down. In fact, if you look at the statistics that came out yesterday, we have the most operations performed per day in January compared to the January of last year. We're making improving recovery. If you look at A&E stats, for example, the harshest winter the NHS has ever faced, we've seen improvements in some of our key sites since that really harsh winter. Inpatient and outpatient waiting lists down 25% for the longest wait. So there are improvements being made. What would I do? I'll continue to make sure that we pay our staff fairly, because that helps with recruitment and retention.
Yes.
I'll make sure that we grow our own in terms of our pipeline of nursing, midwifery and NHS staff. I'll do more to see if we can recruit internationally. I've set very ambitious targets.
All right.
And we're going to meet those. And I'll make sure I do everything in my power to make sure our NHS is as flexible as possible to help with that recruitment and retention issue.
Let's talk about same-sex marriage, because Kate Forbes, as you know, came under pressure and fire for saying that she wouldn't have voted for same-sex marriage if she'd been at Holyrood in 2014 when it came before the Parliament. Should she be excluded from the contest to be SNP leader for saying that?
No, she shouldn't be excluded. I don't believe that's the case.
Right.
I think it's very important, though, that whoever the First Minister is, that people from the LGBT community, but right across society in Scotland, can look that First Minister in the eye and believe that that First Minister will not only stand up for their rights, but protect them, defend them and advance them. Now, I'm the only candidate that has committed to that progressive agenda, which has seen us win election after election, grow our support for independence and ensure that those rights are protected for all. I'm a minority in this country. I've lived my entire life as a minority in this country. My rights are dependent on everybody else's rights. And we need a First Minister, we need a leader who will not just protect those rights, will not just tolerate people, but celebrate them.
So where were you for the final vote yourself? Because the former Health Minister, Alex Neil, has said you deliberately skipped the final vote on equal marriage in 2014. Did you?
Which is incorrect. You do know, of course, Alex Neil is backing another candidate.
That's fine. But
I've made it very clear. I voted at stage 1. The reason why I wasn't at the stage 3 vote, which was well known and made public at the time, was because I was meeting with the Pakistani government, trying to get the release of a Scottish individual who was in a Pakistani jail on death row for the charge of blasphemy. I'm pleased to say, from the series of meetings I had, that individual managed to return home to his family. And his family, of course, put out a statement to say that my intervention at that time was crucial. So it was an unavoidable meeting.
Yeah, but the former First Minister, Alex Salmond,
has the leader of a rival party to the SNP.
Yes, all right, that's absolutely fine. But I'm asking you just to answer these questions honestly. I mean, they have already said they have no skin in this particular game, and people can take that as they will. They can take that as they will. They say, he says, I should say, that you're wrong in your recollection of the events, that at the time you missed the vote due to religious pressure and you sought the permission to skip the vote. Is he lying?
His recollection is very different to my recollection, put it that way. You say he has no skin in the game. He is, of course, the leader of a rival. I'm not. You're asking me to answer honestly, and I will answer honestly. So he is, of course, the leader of a rival party that spends most of its time attacking the SNP. I've said, of course, in 2014, when I was asked, quite rightly, why I wasn't at the vote, that I voted for it at stage 1, and these were the reasons why I couldn't be there for stage 3. But listen, I think the important point is that anybody can look at my track record, whether it's equal marriage, which I said I have voted for and would support to protect, whether it's when I was Justice Secretary and brought in the Turing law, whether it was the extension of hate crime legislation to cover our LGBT community, of course, whether it's most recently supporting the gender recognition reform bill that went through Parliament to make that life a little bit easier for our trans community. My track record on equalities speaks volumes. It's why, of course, so many in our communities, that those who stand up for equality are backing my campaign.
Right. So you did not ask for permission.
I did not.
You didn't.
I've answered this question maybe 100 times.
Just clear, but not on this programme. Just to be clear to our viewers, you did not ask permission to skip that vote.
No, and the business manager at the time, the person who's in charge of slipping people from business, has said very clearly that a number of MSPs did raise concerns about the equal marriage vote, and I was not one of them because I voted for it at stage 1.
Well,
remember, stage 1 is the general principle of the bill. If I disagreed with the general principle of the bill, I wouldn't have been there to vote at stage 1.
OK, Hamza Yousaf, let's talk about independence, because we have front benchers here in the studio. You were very clear in that debate last night as to the process that would be required, the permission that is needed for you to hold a second independence referendum. People might ask, well, what's going to change between the current situation and what you might do? How can you persuade Richard Holden, Transport Minister, and Labour's leader in the House of Lords that they should, in the next government, when it comes, they should grant you a second independence referendum.
It's not about should. I mean, they must respect the
But how will you
democratic
make them
voice
do
of
that?
the Scottish people. Well, my plan is pretty simple, actually. It's not dissimilar to how we ended up getting the Scottish Parliament. We got the Scottish Parliament because we ensured that there was a consistent majority, a settled will,
Right.
who believed in the Scottish Parliament. And then any of the political obstacles that were put up by Labour, by Conservatives, they were completely swept away. We have to make sure we do the same, because let's be frank, support for independence is high. It's probably around about 50-50, but in some polls it fluctuates, 51%, 49%. We can't have that. We have to consistently grow the support for independence.
All right,
if
well,
we
that's
do
clear.
that, independence becomes politically inevitable.
Well, politically inevitable. Do you agree, Angela?
No, I don't at all.
So you would deny democracy.
No.
You would deny the voice of the Scottish people.
I think you said a moment ago you didn't like the tone of the debate because we were interrupting each other. You just interrupted me. No, I don't agree it's inevitable. We're not seeing a consistent increase in support. And if we look, I think, at the SNP, really, have got now no vision for Scotland. They keep harking back to the independence. But I find the debates and what I've seen of it quite unedified and not very entertaining in many ways, just a bit unpleasant. I think a Labour government, which has a vision for Scotland, as Anas does, will see a very different kind of support in Scotland. So I don't see the support growing for independence at all.
Richard, would anything persuade you?
I would just say, look, I really welcome the fact that a lot of this debate is now focused on some of those things that the Scottish Parliament can deliver: transport, NHS, justice, and it's focused on, on a failing record, but that's been done by the SNP themselves. I think we need to get away from this issue of constantly talking about the Constitution and actually start focusing on the issues of people in Scotland.
Hamza Yousaf, thank you very much for joining us today, and we'll try and talk to Ash Regan and Kate Forbes on other occasions. That's all we have time for today. Thank you to all of my guests. We'll be back with more Politics Live tomorrow at 12:15 on BBC Two and the iPlayer. Bye-bye.